Hello there, class. My name is Raquel Collins, and I'm the Assistant Dean at my current institution. I selected the topic of graduate student unionization because an important decision just came out this past August, and it's going to impact the students that we have because we are a graduate school. I thought it was important for me to be knowledgeable about this topic before our first class starts on the 31st of July. Think about the wages and benefits that most of us have today. We have fair wages, overtime pay, child labor laws, safe work environments, equal opportunity, sick leave, family leave, health benefits, and retirement security. From the 1600s through the early 1900s, American workers did not enjoy the benefits that we have today. Immigrants came to this country from their homelands for the American dream. Unfortunately, many employers took advantage of their workers, forcing them to work in unsafe conditions for long hours and very little pay. By the 1900s, average salaries were a meager $400 per year for families, and workers feared speaking out for fear of losing their jobs. Their American dream had turned into a nightmare, and so American workers started banding together across the country, forming unions. Unions are groups of workers that legally negotiate with employers with one voice for improvements in wages, hours, benefits, safety, working conditions, work-life balance, and productivity. The first nationwide union, called the National Labor Union, was formed in 1866 to improve working conditions through legislative reform. The first order of business was to pressure Congress to order an 8-hour workday, which was finally passed 2 years later in 1868. Although the NLU dissolved in 1873, it opened the doors for other national labor associations to be established, including the American Federation of Labor and Congress of Industrial Organizations, the Service Employees International Union, and the United Auto Workers. Unions represent a wide variety of workers, from mechanics to doctors. It's important to distinguish unions for the public sector versus the private sector. Unionization is quite common in the public sector because the collective bargaining status is governed by state law. However, unions in the private sector are overseen by a separate entity called the National Labor Relations Board, or the NLRB. The NLRB is the independent federal agency that protects the rights of private sector employees to join together, with or without a union, to improve their wages and working conditions as defined by the National Labor Relations Act of 1935. The NLRB comprises a 5-member quasi-judicial body appointed by the U.S. President that decides unresolved cases, a general counsel who investigates and prosecutes unfair labor laws, and division of judges who docket, hear, settle, and decide unfair labor law cases throughout the country. The NLRB is headquartered in D.C. with 26 regional offices throughout the country. The first time unions appear in higher education history is the formation of faculty unions between the 1910s and 1930s. However, it wasn't until the 1960s that faculty unions had the power of collective bargaining. Today's faculty unions work to improve and protect salaries and compensation, working conditions, governance, academic freedom, tenure, and promotion. However, there is a stigma associated with unions on campus, with opponents to faculty unions citing a reduction in collegiality, the possibility of a campus liability, the possibility of making academia more businesslike, and the antithesis of fundamental academic values. Despite the stigma associated with faculty unions, a recent study showed that while there has been little growth of faculty unions in public universities, the NLRB certified 20 new private college unions in the first 9 months of 2016. The desire for better pay, benefits, and working conditions on private college campuses does not stop with faculty. The beginning of the graduate student unionization movement began in the late 1960s, with much influence coming from the New Left movement and the UC Berkeley free speech movement. There was little unionization effort until the 1990s, and that's when graduate students started making a push for better wages, benefits, improved workplace conditions, and formal grievance policies as well. From the 90s till now, we have witnessed 3 landmark decisions made by the NLRB. The first one in 2000 involving New York University, the second one 4 years later involving Brown University, and the third one just this past August 2016 involving Columbia University. Let's take a closer look at those cases. Ultimately, the issue of graduate student unionization centers around the argument of whether graduate students are students or employees. If considered students, then graduate students do not have the same worker rights afforded to employees. In 1998, a group of NYU graduate students sought the help of the United Auto Workers, who agreed that students performing research or teaching at the university should have the same rights and protections as those of the working class. On the other hand, NYU administrators claimed that teaching provided educational experience, and students should not have the right to collectively bargain for wages and benefits. After successfully making the case for graduate student unionization to NYU faculty, the NLRB, and let's note that it was at the time controlled by Democratic appointees, but it was a unanimous decision, issued a landmark ruling in 2000 that NYU graduate teaching assistants are employees and therefore earn the right to bargain collectively under the NLRA. Thousands of graduate students began unionizing after NLRB's 2000 NYU decision. However, the victory was short-lived. The UAW, the United Auto Workers, organized teaching assistants at Brown University in 2001 with a successful petition for a union election. Brown University administration appealed to the NLRB, which led the ballots to be impounded and subsequently destroyed. The NLRB, and now at this time controlled by Republican appointees, struck down the landmark 2000 decision, ruling that Brown University teaching and research assistants are not employees and therefore not covered under federal labor laws. The board cited that graduate students are primarily students and that their relationship with universities was educational, not economic. They further indicated that stipends received are considered financial aid, not payment for work. It is important to note that the ruling did not make it illegal to unionize. It just meant that universities were no longer required to bargain with graduate student unions. In 2013, NYU voluntarily decided to permit its graduate student assistants to unionize to avoid any further litigation with the NLRB, thus making NYU the first private university to support graduate student unionization. The 2004 Brown ruling remained the status quo until August 2016, when the NLRB overturned its own decision, ruling that Columbia University grad students who perform research or teach in private universities have the right to unionize. The vote to unionize was obtained this past December, thus making Columbia the second private university with the right to form a union and the first Ivy League institution to do so. However, the university challenged the integrity of the vote, and as of today, Columbia University grad students still do not have a seat at the bargaining table. Nonetheless, the NLRB's 2016 Columbia decision galvanized graduate student union momentum at many schools around the country, including Cornell, Duke, Northwestern, Syracuse, the University of Chicago, the University of Rochester, and Yale, with administrations aggressively contesting the NLRB's decision. Only time will tell if their unions will become certified. As you can imagine, there's a clear difference of opinion between those who support and those who oppose graduate student unionization as to whether it will be successful. Opponents predict that graduate student unionizations will harm the mentor-mentee relationship from cooperative to adversarial, as well as the ideals of academic freedom. They also worry that unionization will further divide the science and engineering students from the humanities and social science students, with some students reminding those who wish to unionize that 1 to 2% of their stipend will go toward union dues. Another important point of contention is how to separate the educational pursuit of the dissertation research from the labor that goes into that work. In the most recent Yale case, administrators felt that micro-unit unionization, or the targeting of specific departments to unionize on campuses where there is no campus-wide support, will divide the graduate students even more. Moreover, the managing of multiple bargaining agreements on one campus will become complicated and could disrupt the very education that these students seek. The most recent NLRB decision has affirmed that graduate students can have both an educational and economic relationship with their institution, that graduate students can be both student and employee, and colleges could be both educator and employer. Because of this decision, the appetite for graduate student unionization is growing. In a recent survey, data showed that unionized graduate students have higher levels of personal and professional support and better pay. Also, perceptions of academic freedom are similar to that of non-unionized students. And together, these data suggest that these arguments should not continue to be the basis of opposition to graduate student unionization. The one thing we know for sure is that there will still be more litigation in the future. Despite what graduate students view as a success with regard to unionization, activists are not optimistic about the future under the Trump administration. The current board, which was appointed by President Obama, is majority Democratic, with 2 Democrats, 1 Republican, and 2 vacant seats. That composition will most likely shift to majority Republican under the new administration in the filling of those 2 seats. There's no doubt that there will be an attempt to overturn the 2016 Columbia decision, and college administrators trying to challenge the ruling will likely run out the clock and wait for the law to be overturned again. Union activists hope that the new administration will focus on other things like healthcare and tax reform before moving on to the graduate student unionization efforts. I hope you've got something out of this presentation on graduate student unionization, and if so, I'd like to get your thoughts. Are you or do you know a student who is a member of a graduate student union? And if so, please share your experience. Do you support or oppose graduate student unionization? And give me your reasons why. And finally, the NLRB rulings have been largely based on political lines. Do you have any ideas that could prevent repetitive litigation with each election cycle? I look forward to our fruitful discussion during our last week of class. Thanks so much for your attention. Take care.